At night, seen from space, Egypt doesn't look like a country. It looks like a single glowing river, a thin, twisting line of light cutting through an enormous slab of total darkness, widening near the top into a bright, blazing fan where it meets the sea. From orbit, astronauts have said it looks like a flower on a long, lit stem. That light is people. More than 100 million of them, and almost every single one is packed onto that thin, glowing thread, while the vast black emptiness all around it sits nearly silent. This is the most lopsided country in the entire 2026 World Cup. A nation of over 100 million people, where almost everyone lives on a sliver of land you could walk across in an afternoon. Egypt makes no sense? Let me show you why. Start with the number that defines the whole country. Egypt is enormous. It's like about 1 million square kilometers, most of it the Sahara, and yet around 95% of all Egyptians live on roughly 5% of the land. The narrow valley of the Nile, its fan-shaped delta, and the strip beside the Suez Canal, the deserts, which make up more than 90% of the territory, hold less than 2% of the people. What that does to the map is almost hard to believe. Along the river, population density is among the highest anywhere on Earth. In parts of Cairo, packed tighter than almost any city in the world. Step a few miles into the desert on either side and it drops to nearly nobody. A country of 100 million, balanced on a green thread drawn through an ocean of sand. And the thread is getting more crowded by the year. In the age of the pharaohs, the same floodplain fed a civilization of maybe 3 million people. Today, it carries more than 30 times that number, and the population is still climbing by well over 1 million people every single year. All of them needing a place on the same narrow ribbon of green. So everything depends on that thread. And the thread depends on the river, which is where it gets strange, because the river isn't really Egypt's. Here's the thing almost nobody realizes. It barely rains in Egypt at all. Out in the deserts, some places get about 1/10 of an inch of rain in a year. Cairo gets almost nothing. By rights, this should be one of the most lifeless stretches of the planet. So where does all the water come from? Not from Egypt. Around 85% of the water in the Nile is born more than 1,000 miles to the south. In the highlands of Ethiopia, where monsoon rains feed the Blue Nile, the rest comes from the Great Lakes near the equator. By the time the river reaches Egypt, it has already done almost all of its living somewhere else. Egypt, the civilization the ancient historians called the gift of the Nile, survives almost entirely on rain that falls in other countries. It is a desert nation living on borrowed water. And then there's what Egypt did to that water. For 5,000 years, the Nile did one reliable thing every summer. It flooded. It spilled over its banks and laid down a fresh layer of dark, fertile silt across the valley. That black mud is the entire reason Egyptian civilization exists. The ancient Egyptians even named their land after it. They called their country Kemet, the Black Land, as opposed to the red, dead sand of the desert beyond. Then, in the 20th century, Egypt built the Aswan High Dam and switched the flood off. For good reasons on paper. The dam tamed the river, stored water for dry years, and generated enormous amounts of electricity. But it came with a hidden cost. The dam doesn't just hold back water, it holds back the silt. All that life-giving black mud now settles to the bottom of the reservoir behind the dam, trapped in the desert instead of spreading across the fields. The land that the flood used to rebuild every year is no longer being fed. The delta, starved of fresh sediment, is slowly sinking and eroding. And as it sinks, the Mediterranean creeps in, poisoning the soil with salt. Egypt tamed the very thing that made it, and the precious 5% began, quietly, to shrink. But the deepest problem of all isn't downstream. It's upstream. Remember where the water comes from. Ethiopia. A country Egypt does not control. And on the Blue Nile, the source of the great majority of Egypt's water, Ethiopia has built the largest hydroelectric dam in all of Africa. The reservoir behind it is so vast, it can hold close to an entire year's worth of the Nile water that normally reaches Egypt, which means how fast Ethiopia chooses to fill and run can shape how much water arrives downstream. From Ethiopia's side, the logic is powerful. It's a poor country where, for years, around half the population had no reliable electricity, and the dam promises light, industry, and a way out of poverty for tens of millions of people. From Egypt's side, it looks like something else entirely. A foreign hand resting on the tap that feeds nearly every Egyptian in a country whose water supply is already stretched past what it consumes. 2 nations, 1 river, and no easy answer. The most populous country in the Arab world depends completely on a source it does not own. And now the final strange twist, because that crushing desert wasn't always there. Just a few thousand years ago, the Sahara was green. Not a metaphor, actually green, grasslands, lakes, herds of cattle, hippos, and people living far out in what is now lifeless sand. We know because they left paintings on the rock, scenes of swimmers and cattle, in places where today it essentially never rains. Then the climate shifted. The rains failed, the green withered into desert, and the people who had spread across a living Sahara were driven, over generations, toward the one place where water still flowed, the Nile. So the crowding isn't an accident. The dying of the Sahara is what packed everyone onto that thread in the first place. Egypt is, in a very real sense, a refuge built by a catastrophe. A civilization that formed because a green world collapsed around a single river and left it as the only way to live. So when the pharaohs walk out at the 2026 World Cup, led, very likely for the last time, by Mohamed Salah in Egypt's fourth appearance for a nation that was the first from the entire African continent to ever play at a World Cup, back in 1934, remember exactly what stands behind them. 100 million people balanced on a green thread in a sea of sand, living on water that falls in other countries. Nourished by a flood, they themselves switched off, watching the source of their lifeline pass into another nation's hands, crowded onto a sliver of land that a dying desert drove them onto thousands of years ago. Egypt makes no sense, and yet it has been making no sense, successfully, for 5,000 years, longer than almost any nation on Earth.